This might genuinely be one of the hardest videos I'll ever make. There are so many good and memorable cities and towns all throughout the Pokemon world. Picking just one for every region is incredibly difficult. And yet, I'm still gonna do it, even though I can already predict there is no way all of you will agree with me. So let me know in the comments what your favorites for every region are. As for my picks, we're of course gonna start in Kanto, which may have suffered a bit from growing pains here and there in its city design, but there are already a lot of locations with their own charm and tons of content packed in. Lavender Town is incredibly memorable in Kanto games, but loses its niche in Johto titles, so is out of consideration. Both Celadon and Saffron City blew me away when I as a kid first set foot in them in Pokemon Blue, but their style of city, being the large metropole in the center of the region, has reappeared frequently, and I'd say it has been done better since in other regions. One city that in my opinion has no equal though is Sinnoh Island. It might not be a big or grand location, and it just flat out doesn't exist in any of the Johto games, but in the Kanto titles it is such a unique and effective location. Mind you, Sinnoh Island has only 5 buildings, but not a single one is filler. You've got the Poké Center and the Mart of course, and Blaine's Fire Gym, which is cool but obviously not unique, but those other two. The Pokemon Mansion was an area that intrigued me so much as a kid, because it was one of the few locations in Kanto that felt like it was part of a bigger story, like there was lore behind it. And if you couldn't tell from the fact I have a Pokemon channel with several lore videos on it, that's an easy way to pique my interest. And unlike other locations in Kanto, like for example the Pokemon Tower in the aforementioned Lavender Town, the Pokemon Mansion has never really lost that edge. Even in Let's Go, it manages to create intrigue, with for example Mewtwo's container still present. While Cinnabar Lab is not a building I have as fond memories of as of Pokemon Mansion, it's still a really cool place to check out, and of course memorable for being the spot where you receive the fossil Pokemon alive and well. But most of all, even after almost 30 years, there is still no location introduced in Pokemon that feels similar to Cinnabar Island, in terms of mystique, setting and intrigue. When we move on to Johto, just like with Kanto, your mind immediately goes to 2 central cities, Goldenrod and Ecruteak City. Both are pretty easily the most memorable and enjoyable locales in the region in my opinion, albeit for very different reasons. Goldenrod City was the largest city in Pokemon at the time of its introduction, and unlike the place that took its title, Hoenn's Lily Cove City, it also feels absolutely massive. There is so much stuff in here, it's honestly kind of crazy. The radio tower, Whitney's gym, the bike shop, the department store, game corner, name raider, Goldenrod tunnel, the magnet train and also Bill's house and the flower shop are all worth it or required to be visited, and especially at the time, having a city stuffed with this much content was unheard of. But similarly to Saffron and Celadon City, nowadays Goldenrod City has been outperformed in its niche by cities that came later, and frankly did the metropole thing even better. And so my vote goes to Ecruteak City. It may not be as packed with content, but what is there is extremely memorable, and all accompanied by a theme that oozes charm. The traditional Japanese architecture, its focus on history and being the city of myths has turned Ecruteak into a symbol for Johto, even if you'll probably spend more time in Goldenrod City. Especially in Heart Gold and Soul Silver does this place make an incredible impact, becoming one of the prettiest locales in all of the sprite-based Pokemon games. Next up is Hoenn, where the cities and towns have a much stronger identity I would say, with some very unique themes, but generally speaking they have left a bit less of an impression on me compared to Johto. Places like Laveridge Town, Fortree City and Pacific Log Town are memorable, sure, but in terms of content they do feel a bit lacking compared to what we've seen in prior regions. Sootopolis City is similar in that it looks great, with an amazing aesthetic, but beyond the gym and the climax of the story, there's not a ton going on here. It does earn some bonus points for its super unique layout though. I always love the town surrounding the gym on an island in the middle. I also want to give Slateport City a special mention, for being a remarkably memorable location even though it doesn't have a gym, which is of course a big boon to your status usually. Just a run up from the beach to the town with the market is a core memory I have from the Gen 3 games. I don't know, it always kinda marks the beginning of the true adventure for me. Like, the tutorial is now over, welcome to the real world. But it loses out to what I would consider the best city in Hoenn, which is Marvel City. And that is not based on Gen 3 games at all actually, because in the original title, the city is okay-ish, I guess. It has the game corner, which is cool, and the bike shop, which you actually revisit frequently in this game, but that's about it. But in ORAS, oh man, this place got a glow up. I really like it now being almost entirely indoor, and the mall theme it goes for also works very well. It upgrades from Marvel City being a pretty bang average couple of houses into a super memorable location, with tons of nifty little shops and places. It also made for one of the few locations in the remakes where veterans could also explore a genuinely new area, which I didn't expect to see at all, so that was a very pleasant surprise. For Sinnoh, I want to start things off with another shout out to a super memorable place without a gym, being Jubilife City. The music is great, the way it's introduced with the clowns is great, and there are a lot of places of interest that give you a ton of reasons to return frequently. It isn't the absolute best, mostly because the themes and vibe of the city are a bit too usual and being just another modern city, but it's still great regardless. Another amazing spot in Sinnoh is Eterna City, the place that first conveys how historic and important the Sinnoh region is. It's also where you take the fight at Team Galactic headquarters and of course the location of the second gym, both memorable in its own right. But the true best city of Sinnoh for me is Hardhome City, smack dab in the middle of the region. I have to say though, it was very close. There are a lot of places in Sinnoh that are fair contenders, and the gaps in quality are minimal, but I personally have always really enjoyed the vibe of Hardhome. With the contest hall, Amity Square and the strange church, it has a lot of unique features that help it stand out from other places in Sinnoh, with obviously a gym to boot as well. While I admit Hardhome City does also fit the category of modern city that cost Jubilife City my vote, I feel like the presence of Amity Square and also the Forum building help give Hardhome a bit more charm and grandeur than Jubilife City has on offer. But again, it's small differences here in Sinnoh. All cities are fairly comparable in my opinion. Onto Unova, which may have a ton of amazing cities and towns that look gorgeous and flow over with charm, but there are only two cities I can truly consider candidates, purely based on how much content they pack. Nimbasa and Castelia City are respectively the most populous and largest cities in Unova, and in my opinion at least, one of them has to be the best city in the region. Nimbasa City is a place revolving entirely around entertainment. It has two sports stadiums, a Ferris wheel, a roller coaster themed gym, the Battle Subway, and Unova's equivalent of a contest hall, the Pokémon musicals. So not only do you feel borderline overwhelmed by how much stuff is suddenly available to you when you first set foot in here, you'll also be returning frequently, even during the postgame. But in terms of design, Nimbasa City is a little predictable. It has great landmarks, yes, but the overall layout and theming of the city is not as amazing as the content it houses. And that's something that cannot be said of Castelia City in my opinion. Castelia is not only absolutely enormous, it's incredibly charming with how it presents itself as a true metropole. The road near the docks is super memorable, the streets where the camera shifts are iconic, and the infinite amount of people passing you by is such a unique feature that further helps build up the identity of the place. Now, if this was it, if Castelia was all style and Nimbasa all content, it may have been a very close call. But Castelia City is also packed to the brim with stuff to do. The Game Freak offices, Burke's gym, the sewers in Black and White 2, the Battle Company, and just overall the many buildings and NPCs spread throughout, it's more than enough for me to consider Castelia City the winner. It's still close, Nimbasa City is also stellar, but I have to give the crown to Castelia. And while developing the next region, Kalos, the design team may have found themselves agreeing with me, because there is definitely a ton of inspiration from Castelia City visible in Lumio City, the metropole of the Kalos region. Now, as I also mentioned in my video talking about the worst cities in Pokémon, Lumio City is incredibly divisive, and I can see why. I don't want to repeat myself word for word, but it definitely feels like Game Freak took on a bit more than they could handle with a city of this size in their first 3D game, and the city's quality suffered from it. But honestly, I still consider it to be Kalos' best city. And that mostly has to do with the fact that, well, there are plenty of places in the region that have a ton of charm, like Laverse City's very aesthetic and Coumarine City's interesting setup using elevation. They are very lacking in the content department. There are way too many towns and cities here that you basically never have any reason to visit again following your initial stop, and that's a huge problem. Lumiose City is the only place that manages to break free from that pattern, having a ton of features and places to visit, plenty of which are still useful after you've become champion. It says enough that Lumiose City alone will most likely be the setting for Pokémon Legends ZA. There are not a lot of cities in Pokémon so grand they could carry a game all by themselves. Onto Alola, which continued the trend of towns and cities looking nice and having a ton of charm, but falling flat in the content department. Compared to Kalos though, I'd say it's a bit of a step up, even if the lack of a true metropole like Lumiose City also means there's not one obvious candidate for the best city. I've always enjoyed visiting Hoenn City, the first you come across in the game, and which also leaves a great first impression with the trainer school. I guess the school is technically on Route 1, but is there anyone out there who doesn't consider this to be a part of Hoenn City? I'm counting it. Another major selling point for me are the patches of grass containing wild Pokémon here, as I've always been a big fan of being able to find Pokémon in urban environments. That said, the city does lack a bit of identity, especially considering there are plenty of cities later in your Alolan journey that feel somewhat similar to Hoenn City. That can definitely not be said for Mali City though, which is incredibly unique in that it is based on Japanese architecture and reminiscent of Johto's best city, Akratig. You can call it a boring pick all you want, but competition in Johto was a lot fiercer than in Alola, so this aesthetic alone puts Mali City well in the lead. Factor in the great Mali Garden and the Cantonian Gym introduced in the Ultra games and you get what I would consider a clear winner. In Galar, we find the trend of style over substance is ever present, arguably even with the biggest gap so far. I honestly really like the way Galar's towns and cities look. They're vibrant, they're all aggressively British, and they have very distinct themes. But most of them barely contain anything of note, and don't exactly feel alive. One place that I feel deserves a massive shout out though is Postwick, the place that contains really just your character's house and house. As such, it may sound lackluster, but if you ask me, the vibes of a humble small town beginning have never before been so strong. The acres of land in the background and the path leading to Route 1 with the Wooloos in the way, it all makes for a very fitting image that really makes you feel like you're in the countryside. But I'm not so insane that I'm gonna call Two Houses the best city in the game, so I have to look elsewhere. Balonlia looks amazing, but might just be the biggest offender of the lack of content out there. Hulbury has a bit more to do, but it's maybe a bit too standard design wise. And so I ended up at Hammerlock and Winden. Hammerlock might honestly be one of the best looking cities in all of Pokémon. How often have we traversed a route, or the wild area in this case, only to see a city pop up in the distance that looked as awesome as Hammerlock? Now, unfortunately, the actual city itself isn't as amazing, but it still has a cool theme that resembles a castle town. Compared to fellow megacities Castelia and Lumiose, Winden definitely is a bit of a letdown, but as its own thing compared to the rest of Galar, I think it's still quite strong. There are a lot of interesting landmarks, a decent amount of content and reasons to visit, with both the Battle Tower and Wyndham Stadium being found here. What I also like is how the city both feels like a massive tourist attraction, but also still quite homely, especially thanks to the street to the right of the square. It's incredibly close between Hammerlock and Winden for me, but I'm gonna give Winden the slightest edge possible. Even though Jubilee Village from Hisui may be one of the best towns in all of Pokémon history, we are of course gonna skip it, considering it's really the only one in Legends Arceus, and so end up at Paldea. This probably won't be the first time you're hearing this, so I'll keep it short, but man, Paldean cities are not it. There are some that have solid ideas design-wise, like Cascaraffa and Alfornada, but almost all of them just feel off. They feel unexplorable, have no life inside them, or any charm to speak of really. It's like the devs looked at Galar and instead of keeping the charm and upping the content, they kept the lack of content and removed the charm. The only city that still feels somewhat explorable and has some reason to revisit it is of course Messagosa, which had it appeared a few generations ago, probably would have been seen rather favorably. After all, it is pretty large, has a nice design, plenty of recognizable sights, and does feel explorable. The problem is though that actually exploring it feels pretty unrewarding. However, I feel like compared to the other places in Paldea, it's still the best, even if only because of the academy building being here. So yeah, quite a sour note to end the video all about positivity on, but it is what it is. What do you consider the best cities and towns in Pokemon? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed my takes, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Pokemon content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.